What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of I Got More, and this is a special edition. Right now, we are talking about what's wrong with the NBA. I have a round table, and my guests are Tyra Biggs, Ari, Josh Rodriguez from the Dime, and this is going to be a good one. We are talking about what's wrong with the NBA in terms of promotion, consumption, and the way it's covered. The game of basketball is exciting. And for an exciting and cool as the NBA is, it doesn't translate into ratings. And it's not the product's fault. The product is the best that it's ever been. The problem is how the game is promoted, covered, and consumed by the fans. And I will open with Josh. What are your thoughts on how the NBA is covered from the media standpoint? And from the fan in you, how do you differentiate between covering the game and not get having your bias getting away?
Well, that's a loaded question. Well, I guess to start off, I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with how the game's covered. I mean, I think you have these debate shows right on Fox Sports or ESPN, and what they do is they create narratives that we discuss as fans, and they drive conversation. And I think I have a problem with the conversation that's being formed up with these debate shows. We're constantly comparing these athletes to each other and constantly saying who's better than who, where and instead of just appreciating greatness for what it is. I mean, before the show, we were talking about Dame and Steph. Right now, there's a bunch of people comparing Dame to Steph and vice versa instead of just appreciating what's going on. And what I think happens is it just creates these false narratives and these storylines that just kind of aren't interesting, and we don't appreciate what we're watching. Growing up as a Knicks fan in the 90s, I remember the NBA and NBC, and the Jazz had Malone and Stockton, and the Suns had Barkley, and the
Yeah.
had Ewing, and the Bulls had Jordan, and the Blazers had Drexler, and it was just like you knew what you were getting into, and you appreciated every single team for what they were and every player for what they were. There wasn't this comparison stuff. You were excited to watch every team, even if they were going against your team, and I'm not really sure we have that anymore. So I just think the narratives that are formed in the media kind of hurt in a way where it's just a different game to watch now. That's all.
Okay, what about you, Tara? Your thoughts?
So when I watch like I have a front row seat to a few conversations that just kind of make me go, ah. One of, excuse me, one of them is like, can CJ and Dame exist on the same team? Can they build a championship? And that becomes like the focus of everything around the team about whether or not, Dame and CJ can lead the team to championships, when it's clearly that's who's on the team and that's who's leading the team right now. So why are we trying to break it up before we even seen like their maximum capacity? And I don't mind that like as a thought experiment, but I think sometimes it crosses from thought experiment to putting our nose into business that is not our business. Like that's the front office's business. And I learn a lot from these discussions about whether or not Dame and CJ can exist on the team, together. But I also think that it crosses the line into a place where like Dame and CJ don't want to hear about that anymore. And I keep saying, like, Dame says over and over and over again that he is not going to leave Portland. And I keep saying if he leaves Portland, it's because we've taken this conversation too far. And I think kind of the democratization of covering sports has sort of resulted in something that I think is probably pretty natural and like sort of the course of things, but it's gotten to a point where we're all sticking our nose in front office business, or think that we are, and it kind of takes away from just the pure enjoyment of the game, because we're having all these side conversations about like, can Dame and CJ exist, when they're playing out on the court right now and they're fantastic. Like, can we just that?
Okay, Ari, what about you? What are your thoughts on my question?
So I think that in general, the way social media has been kind of embraced is single serving narratives without any accountability. So I can sit here and I can tweet something out and I can have a narrative about any opinion on any narrative that I want. and I have no accountability on it. I can tweet it and then I can retweet 10 things, and then that tweet just gets disappeared and dissolved, right? And so what's happening here is a lot of people have these big opinions and they really have no backing. It's just somebody's trying to get more followers, something's trying to happen. And so what you're finding is you're finding these people that are finding narratives that drive a following, or on the higher end, people are finding narratives that are driving their careers. So people like, and I say this with all due respect because I'm going to name some big names, right? And I'm just a guy who follows sports. I'm sitting here on a podcast with you guys in my basement, right? But somebody like Kendrick Perkins, okay? Kendrick Perkins is an NBA vet. Guy had a nice career. I respect his talent. And guy's, you know, a great guy. There's a lot of people in the NBA that super respect what he's doing, but he's literally putting out narratives that are driving combative opinions, and that brings his ratings up, okay? Somebody like Skip Bayless is doing the same thing. So you find one level of the fans that love and enjoy the product of the NBA and you know, want their Pistons to be, you know, back relative, or you want, even if they're not, I'm following every sport or every team that I can follow because I love the NBA. You guys got people like Skip Bayless who's, you know, won't even say Kawhi Leonard's name, calls him number 2 for years. And then he goes against LeBron on the Clippers and he's talking about how Kawhi's back now, the guy. And this is, you know, so it's just all fake and it's all phony. And so you get these people who are these big head, big popular talking head people that have these massive opinions that are super polarizing. And then you have all the other people that that are trying to get to that point in their career who think, oh, that's the way to do it. I have to have these super polarizing opinions to be good. And at the end of the day, it's just the way social media, unfortunately, is created with these single serving narratives. And it's just a byproduct of that. So in my opinion, I think the NBA is, like you had mentioned, it's a wonderful product right now. There's talent everywhere. I mean, my Pistons are one of the worst teams in the league. And if you give me a healthy Blake Griffin, and we're watchable, Sekou Doumbouya, we got some good young talent, right? All the way up to, you know, the top of the list where people, you know, the Bucks, small market, right? OKC Thunder, unbelievable team to watch. I love the OKC Thunder. But at the same time, you log on to Twitter, you get on some of these websites, and you're just like, it's sometimes it's just, you can't even listen to it. You can't even read it. You got to figure out who to follow, and you have to really, you know, control your own narrative on social media so that you're not, I guess, falling into the depths of it.
All right, speaking for me, I'm going to speak for me as a reporter and as a fan. And the reporter in me, I believe that it is possible to go in and do your job and don't have to cater to a bunch of narratives. I mean, narratives are good in their place, but too many narratives becomes, you know, really toxic. And, you know, I went to J school. I graduated from North Carolina A&T about a minute ago. And I hate to be telling my age on here, but yeah, I do remember the NBA on NBC and grew up watching it. So I come in that era. And when I was in school, we wasn't taught this. You know, we wasn't taught to create narratives and to drive up opinions and content. And, you know, people like Skip Bayless wasn't. Stephen A. Smith wasn't. But, you know, you cannot resist the money. And I think that's what it comes down to as far as reporters go. They sell out, and rightfully so, because, I mean, the money is irresistible. But in the process, they're really bringing down the product. And as far as the fan in me, you know, like I said, again, too many narratives just really ruined the experience for me. And like I was talking about before we opened, I love what Dame Lillard is doing. You know, I love that type of player, and I love Steph too. And having them being pitted against each other like that is just really aggravating. I mean, it is possible that you could just sit your butt down, watch a game, and take it in, absorb it, without having to go on Twitter or wherever to compare. I mean, I know you do that in barbershops or whatever, but not everything need to be quantified. Not everything need to be compared. That's how I look at it.
So I have a question for you, Jannelle. You were talking about narratives, and I'm a question for you or for anybody. I'm wondering, like, how because in order to get people to follow the NBA, you often draw them in with the narrative. So like, I know that like that's what got me in, as I was interested in the stories and the players and their lives, and the hearing about different rivalries, and that's what drew me in the first place. So how do we balance that? And I think I can't remember if it was you, which one of you guys said it, but like things have gotten really polarizing, and one of the things about narrative
It was Josh.
is that
Josh
people
said that.
Okay, so I agree that like the polarization is just like maddening, because like as if we needed anything to drive us any farther apart. And I feel like an important part of narrative is to, if people take the time to listen to it and follow it, is they can build more of the story around it, rather than just like microanalyzing whether or not Damian Lillard died on too many screens one night, which some people may get really caught up in. But I'm sitting here looking at it from the level of like Damian Lillard is the greatest leader that Portland has ever had.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how do we strike that balance?
Now speaking for me, narratives is what can bring you in, and that's what brought me in when I was a little girl. About the rivalries, Magic and Magic and Bird, Jordan, and you need narratives to drive you in. But I guess it's up to the person to understand the nuances and not be too swayed by the narratives, if that makes any sense. And narratives are good. I'm not saying that we should not have narratives. Narratives are important, but what really makes them toxic is narratives with a hit of an agenda. It's always an agenda. Skip Sayless. I ain't calling him Bayless on the show. Skip Sayless always have an agenda. He has an agenda, even, for example, when he calls Kawhi number 2. Whenever he rips off on Dame, whenever he rips off on LeBron, there's always agenda hooked up into the narratives. And that's what makes them bad.
I don't know if this agenda drives Damian Lillard to upset LeBron in the first round. I'm like all for it. I keep thinking that he has like a secret agenda where at the end of it, he's going to like make this clip show of all of his videos that are really like super pro Damian Lillard. And he's like, y'all weren't listening. But that's me having too much time to myself these days.
Well, to me, I think the deeper issue is like, I think these narratives kind of create, you create sides, but it's not basically my team versus your team. It becomes one player versus another player, and that's when it becomes disinteresting. You know what I mean? I growing up, I mean, it was a little a different era. I think a lot of kids now and people younger than us, they root for players. They don't necessarily root for teams. So you might have a Harden fan, and he just watches James Harden. That's all he really cares about in the league. Growing up, if you're a Blazers fan, I'm a Knicks fan. So I cared about what the Pacers did. I cared about what the Heat did. And I watched the game and for the other teams as well. And I cared about the other teams, and the narratives surrounding everything were about the other teams and not a particular player on that team. Every once in a while you might get a story about like Tim Hardaway Jr. or Alonzo Mourning or Latrell, whatever. But at the end of the day, it was about the teams and the teams accomplishing a goal. Now a lot of the conversation is about, can LeBron eclipse Jordan in this category? Can Harden score this many points? And I think those type of conversations don't really drive eyes towards the games, but more towards the box scores and towards social media highlights. And I think that's why a big reason why ratings are going down. People don't really necessarily want to watch the games. They kind of want like a 5 to 10 minute clip of the highlights and what cool thing has happened.
Yes. And here's something that's interesting that I've heard about this week. Ramona Shelburne admitted that her narratives, drives her in voting. And also Chris Broussard admitted, I guess inadvertently, that he picked LeBron James's teams to win because he liked LeBron James. And, for us in the media, speaking for myself and for all of us in the media, do you find it hard to walk that line between objectivity and bias? And if not, why does it seem so hard for those in the media, in the mainstream media, to do so? I don't find it hard for me personally. What about you guys?
I think narrative and bias is an important distinction within the entire conversation of coverage of basketball, right? Because you'll have somebody like Woj, right? Woj is a complete journalist. He sources everything. He breaks stories, but then he has a podcast where he has narratives, right? Where he splits his bias. And well, he doesn't really spend too much bias, but you understand what I'm saying? Like, journalists now still have access to be able to give opinion. And so you're no longer just like reading the column of your favorite news journalist and their, journalistic integrities are in that column. You also have access to their personal beliefs within their Twitter account, within whatever podcast maybe they have. And so, in my opinion, I saw what Ramona Shelbourne said, and I saw Broussard, and in my opinion, I do believe that narrative is an important part of voting on MVP and on Rookie of the Year and things of that nature. How you go about your season and how you kind of put your exclamation point on whatever it is your candidacy is for Player of the Year, MVP, for Rookie of the Year, whatever it is. The one thing that you can't let creep in there if you have a ballot, if you have any journalistic integrity at all, is your bias, right? Bias and narrative is different. You cannot inject your bias. Like for me, for the Pistons, right? I'm a huge, massive Pistons fan. I have been my whole life. I love the Pistons. There's no better way to win a championship, in my opinion, than playing just hard-nosed defense. I put it on my Twitter account. I've adopted the Raptors as my bubble team this year because they play a little bit like that 04 Pistons team, and I love that. But if I don't have a ballot for MVP, I'm not anything like that. I don't have a bubble team of the year, but because of that, maybe I would have voted for Nick Nurse if I threw bias into it over maybe voting for Monty Williams, who 100% deserved coach of the bubble, right? So the narrative of what Monty Williams did in terms of how he brought that team that really didn't have any business being invited to the bubble, besides they wanted to get the Wizards an opportunity to play in, and the Wizards had a worse record than the Suns. He deserved coach of the year because of that narrative, or coach of the bubble, right? But my bias maybe would have led me to vote for Nick Nurse, and that would have been inappropriate. So that's kind of where that differentiator is. And I think some of the people do bring their biases in, and that's inappropriate. But I do believe narrative is a very important part of why you vote for somebody over somebody else, or why you're comparing somebody. And, it's hard to teach people who don't know the history that, for instance, Elgin Baylor's a top 15 all-time NBA player, in my opinion. But you'll get people that say, oh, James Harden's scoring 1,000 points, a night, essentially, and he's the best player ever, right? But, that's narrative-based bias. But, proper narrative, I think, is important when you're making decisions on MVP, Rookie of the Year, on whatever it may be.
I totally agree. And I agree with your comparison about this Raptors and the '04 Pistons team. I actually wrote about that for Complex. So spot on. That is spot on right there. Yeah. There was a couple of tweets yesterday that really struck a chord with me. There was one guy, I think his handle was Dubs Aces. He said that the game of basketball is pure. The NBA game of basketball is a production with basketball as the backdrop. What do y'all think about that?
So one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the whole bubble experience is like the barnstorming feel of it, like how you see them practicing like in the ballroom, and you see the chandeliers that have been moved aside and all this stuff. And it reminds me, like, I've read a lot about early history of basketball, and like that's how basketball used to be played. It would be teams would call around and go, who's going to play us, and then they like move all the chairs to the side and set up in a ballroom, and everybody come and they'd be right there and watch. And I think because we've gotten so used to the NBA, we've forgotten like that. That's just all we know is that's how basketball is played, that you play it in the NBA or you play it in college or you're like a rec player or whatever. And I've loved having sort of like a whole different experience of the game. And even though it's being run by the league, I've really enjoyed that. There's a different way for us to find out that we can consume this. I'm like all in on tournament play. I want all tournaments now. This is so much fun. I love the idea of everybody coming together and fighting it out there. Like have a bunch of it's just, for me, it's been a reminder that even though the NBA is like the biggest thing out there right now, it's not the only way that basketball has ever historically been enjoyed.
All right, your thoughts, Josh and Ari?
Well, I took his quote to be a little different. I mean, he said the NBA game is not pure anymore, which I think that sounds like someone who just doesn't like the fact that Dame is pulling up from 40 feet and nailing 3-pointers. They rather see some type of offensive basketball, motion offense and things like that. I think a lot of people haven't adapted to the new way of playing. I think a lot of people turned off the way since it's played this like basketball. There's really no ball movement. It's just a cheap way to play the game. And that's how I took the quote, at least. But I think these new ways of playing, I think it's beautiful. I mean, players are so talented now. I mean, Dame pulls up from 35 feet, and you really can't complain because he hits it like 7 out of 10 times. And, the basketball purist in me goes, oh my God, that's such a terrible shot. But when he hits it 70% of the time, like after a while, you just got to tip your cat and go, all right, you know what? Maybe it's not so much a bad shot. And the same goes for Steph, and the same goes for a lot of other players in this league. They're taking shots that they normally should not be taking. They're hitting it. I mean, the talent in this league right now is so vast and so good. The basketball isn't necessarily their name. We don't really see backdoor cuts, like motion offenses, or just the way the game is quote unquote supposed to be played. So when I hear something like that, that's what I think he's talking about. And to him, I would just say, just get used to the new game because A, it's beautiful, and B, you're missing out on a lot. I do think the product is as good as it's ever been, and the players are as good as they've ever been.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the talent in the NBA is like you were saying, it's ridiculous. You have a 7-footer Kevin Durant, you have a 7-footer Giannis Antetokounmpo, who are like mind-blowingly good at basketball, but also super skilled in terms of quickness, in terms of lateral movement. And then you guys have, you have, like you're saying, Steph Curry. You got this younger crop of players are coming in, like Luka Doncic, who's doing just absolutely ridiculous things with the basketball. You got Nikola Jokic doing a bunch of good stuff. So what you have is teams that are curating their offenses based upon these spectacular, talented players. Whereas before, I think really Magic and Larry changed this game a little bit. But like before, there was more of like a team orchestrated basketball because you didn't have these superior talents all over the floor that you had to cater your offense to. One, because they're that good, and two, because the NBA is based upon transactional free agency, and you have to make sure that player stays in your market. And so, the team basketball skill, and again, here's my bias, here's my narrative, right? That Pistons team, every Pistons championship has come without a future, current, or former MVP on their teams, right? Piston basketball, in my opinion, is very good team basketball. Blazers basketball right now is fantastic team basketball. Okay, but they have Dame Lillard, so they're catering to him a lot. But you have Nurkic cleaning up the boards and things of that nature as well. But Giannis, without Giannis, the Bucks, are super mediocre. Without LeBron, you have essentially the Pelicans before, when Anthony Davis was playing there. So, you have to cater these individuals. And so what happens is the purity of basketball, which I can't disagree with, right? Because the purity of basketball is a team-oriented sport. I don't even think when Naismith made the rules, you could even dribble, right? You had to just keep passing the ball.
Yeah.
And so, when you look at it like that, yeah, sure. I don't know what that guy meant on that quote, but maybe if that's what he was saying with the purity of basketball being this like fluid motion, team orchestrated game, you can find some teams that are doing it. If you watch basketball, you watch the NBA, right? People are doing that. I'm not here saying that's not happening, but when you watch the commercials or if you look at the the Sports Center highlights, it's all individual versus individual. Mm-hmm. It's all Dame versus Ja. It's all whoever versus whoever, and so you kind of lose that breed of basketball. But to Josh's point, the basketball is phenomenal. These players are unbelievable. People are Zach LaVine dunked through his legs from the free throw line.
It's ridiculous. Not even human.
So I don't know. Purity, sure. I guess team sports changed a little bit, but
I don't think that's what he meant. I don't think his quote has anything to do with the talent on the floor. I think what he means is that it's all about the narratives oversaturating things. And some of the politics in the league. I think that's what he is meaning versus, the purity in terms of the skill levels and, stuff like that. I mean, there's no problem with the product and the talent of this league. I mean, and anybody who has a problem with the talent of this league and what they're doing right now, and I don't know what to tell them. They could go watch Bob Cousy highlights and call it a day. It ain't about that. I mean, for real though. For real.
Well, there's a lot of people like that.
Well,
There's
they
a
could
lot
go
of people
sit
like
down.
that.
They could go sit down and watch Bob Cousy highlights and tweet about that.
Yep.
But I think what he's saying is about how it's more for production. You bring in some of the narratives and also, you know, off court issues and social media drama. I think that's what he means.
It's so much more that it's not just basketball anymore. It's more of just like a show,
It's a
and the
billion
basketball
dollar
is
industry.
back.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess but I understand it in this day and age. I mean, everyone has a cell phone right now. On your cell phone, you can
Yeah.
access anything you want. You have to be able to compete with different things right now. And I think a big reason why ratings are down is not necessarily because the game is bad, but also because we have so many options. Like, you don't have to watch the NBA on NBC on Saturday. Like, you can literally go on Netflix or go on Hulu and watch anything you want at any given time. So the NBA does have to compete with all these sources of media. And in order to do that, you do have to put on some type of production. And I understand that sometimes narratives and things can be over the top, but I also do think it's a necessary evil if you're going to want eyes on your product.
Well, and I also think without the players, this league would be nothing.
True.
And to not highlight them and for us to not see how they innovate and change the game would be like super short-sighted. And I think so people who like how things were, maybe they're afraid of, the old school way was that the owners decided what happened and the league made all of the decisions. And that's not how things are anymore. The players are taking control of the product because they're the ones that we're watching. And, I think it makes sense that, we're spending a lot of time getting to know more about who they are. We're looking at like what they're wearing before they even get to the court. I mean, they are why we're there. And so if they're creating, more spectacle than people are used to in the past, then, who are we to complain? Like, I'm here for it.
The players drive a lot of the narrative too, whether it's a current player or a retired player. I mean, 90% of the narrative-based drama in the NBA is, Shaq, Charles Barkley, Kendrick Perkins, players drive the narrative big time. Like, we can highlight Skip Bayless or Bip Scaless or whatever you call them. But, the players drive the narrative too, to be honest with you. I mean, you got, Kevin Durant is ridiculous with his Twitter fingers, right? He's all over the place. You have everybody doing everything. I mean, Dame's throwing diss tracks out there. It's fantastic. So, it's a $1 billion industry. We have a salary cap because of the broadcast TV partners, and it's so high because of them. And, what Josh said, TV and the people, how they consume their television is binge, right? You binge everything, and you can't really binge the NBA per se, right? You could watch a bunch of games a night or something like that, but that's not really what that atmosphere is about. So what people do is they binge highlights or they binge opinions on social media or they binge it like that. And so they just got to find a way to monetize it. And they seem like they are. They're making a ton of money. The NBA is not hurting for money. And I don't know if like TV ratings, and I'm not an expert in broadcast demographics. I'm not sure if that's the proper way to figure out who's watching and who's not and where it's coming from.
Well, Draymond Green actually responded to Dub Aces on Twitter, that quote that I just mentioned, and he said, that's fair. Talking about how the game of basketball is, a production now. He said, but there's still a game of basketball being played. It's a beautiful piece of art. However, the value is killed daily due to a world of analysts and lack of people that just watch and enjoy and appreciate. Is that true?
Can you repeat that quote?
Yeah, Draymond said that basketball is a beautiful piece of art. However, the value is killed daily due to a bunch of analysts and the lack of people that just watch, enjoy, and appreciate. There's not enough of people that just watch the game for what it is anymore, and the
Yeah,
analysts just
yeah.
doing whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to my original point where it's like, I feel like, and this is just anecdotal, I could be wrong about this, but I just feel like there are a lot of people who are watching games for certain types of narratives or watching games for specific players, and you have very few fan bases that are literally like, this is my team, I'm rooting for my team. Like, you have, like, I can count on both hands how many fan bases are like that. I feel like the younger generation, they just kind of want to consume social media highlights and just talk crap about other things. And yeah, I guess I see his point there. But the game is changing, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We just, like Tara said, we have to find a happy medium where it's like we can have these things, we can have these narratives, we can have these conversations, but we also have to make it translate into more eyes on the actual game themselves.
Yes, I think I agree with Draymond because there are not a lot of people that just watch and enjoy and appreciate. And I think that goes in terms of, social media and, you know, I mean, the NBA is cool and everybody would naturally love to be a part of it and to talk. But the problem is these guys with their Twitter fingers don't know what they're talking about. And it's a cycle. There's analysts and reporters that don't know what they're talking about, and they're there making millions, and that's where they get their cues from each other. They feed off of each other, and I think that's what the problem is. And I'm I'm a fan that likes to learn. I'm not going to sit up here and say that I know everything about the game. I don't, and I like to talk to like-minded people that knows about the game, and if I could learn from them, that is just awesome. And I wish reporters would take that same mindset, but it seems like a lot of them don't. They're just there because it's the wave and they're getting paid. That's how I feel about it. Kind of shallow, but that's what I think.
Well, I think one of the things that I try to remind people and myself is that, like, if you're a fan, you're a fan. There's no right or wrong way to be a fan, in my opinion. I think that we kind of sometimes lose sight because it's such a huge business that makes so much money and so many lives depend on it. That's all true, but also ultimately it's a sport for entertainment. And I think as such, it can be a catalyst for bringing people together, let's say, for getting people to rally around something. I mean, right now, everybody in Portland is walking around in their, Rip City shirts, like happens every year right before the playoffs. And like some people are like, oh, they're just bandwagon fans. And I'm like, bring them on board. It's like when you're walking down the street and high fiving. Well, back in the day when we used to high five random people, we don't do that. But when you're doing the head nod under your mask, because it's like sports is something that can unite us. And I think the NBA does a particularly good job of that. And so I think people shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are a lot of people out there who really don't know that much about the game, and they may kind of fly in for the playoffs and leave, but like they're still there. So, I just think it's important to keep in mind that there's all kinds of different fans at all different levels of it. And like you said, Jannelle, like you like to learn stuff. So like when I talk about sports to my like non-sports friends, like I know what they're interested in, and I know like there is something for everybody. There's like not a person on earth that couldn't find one thing to be interested in or fascinating about the NBA. So I think it's, I think the people who talk about it are important for that reason, but we just have to kind of keep our eye on the fact that, too much judgment about any one thing can be detrimental to the overall product or to the players who are, again, the ones that we're watching.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I was kind of harsh about that, but it's just that a lot of times there are fans, I guess, that don't really want to learn about the game, but want to have their opinion and I guess want to win arguments and all of that instead of just really sitting down and appreciating the game for what it is. And I guess that's the point what Draymond is trying to make, and that's what I kind of agree on.
Yeah, I think there are people who just want to be jerks.
Yeah, it's not enough to just sit down and just appreciate what you're seeing. And if you don't know what you're seeing, it's okay to say, look, I don't know what I'm watching, but it shouldn't be ashamed to ask, I guess, for help or ask for some direction so they can better understand and consequently better appreciate what they're watching. We don't have enough of that anymore.
That's why I'm always asking you, Jannelle, stuff. She's always explaining stuff to me. It's great.
people say sometimes that the broadcasters and the analysts really don't like what they cover. And I guess, there's people that, bash the product, and this is the product that's paying their bills. I mean, do you find that true? And if so, why do you think that they're there? I mean, obviously it's the money, but, there's other ways to get paid. Why are they there if they don't like the product? And, what would you look for? And what would you look for in an analyst or a commentator? I mean, if people don't like what they're watching, and that kind of translates to, well, what
So
they say on the
I'll give you some
air.
real life examples on that. So like some of my favorites in the business, right? So I really like Stan Van Gundy. I think he's a fantastic analyst. I think the play-by-play guys are great, right? I follow local play-by-play broadcasts. Shout out to George Blaha, who's like a legend here in Detroit, right? Gregory
Yeah.
Kelster, who is an NBA vet and Michigan State Spartan alum. They have one good chemistry with each other, but they also have very good feel of the game. You want your analyst to bring that color, right? Stan Van Gundy does a good job of bringing in worldly topics too right now, which is nice to see and refreshing. But that's from a play analyst, like actually courtside play analyst, that's what I look for. Some really good color commentary that's going to break down maybe some coaching expertise or maybe some how I would have done this as a player type of expertise. And then you want a guy with a good catchphrase, a good voice, and somebody who's going to drive the action as a play-by-play. But then maybe on radio, for instance, I listen to a little bit of Sirius XM radio, and the guys who are on there, whether it be Frank Isola, Justin Termini, those guys have big opinions, but they're more personalities, right? They're paid for their opinions, and what they do is they drive the narrative, and they try to keep their bias out of it, which I really appreciate, right? Because I want that narrative-driven content without the bias, and sometimes it's hard to find that, and so you just gotta, like anything in life, you gotta find your lane, you gotta get comfortable with it, you gotta stay in it, right? I'm on social media, and to your guys' point, you see some people who have zero idea about any historical value of players, from 1995 and before, right? Just no knowledge of it. And you could sit there and thunder off 100 tweets about, hey, this is what I think, and over you. Then no one listens to you, right? It doesn't matter. Everybody has their own opinion, and they're going to stick with it. So the people who really want to learn about the sport are going to maybe watch this podcast or watch another podcast or Google some information or look up some stats or do one thing or the other, watch the games, study pick and roll, study things like that. But the vast
Yes.
majority of people who, like to your previous point, who Draymond was talking about, those people are here for just watching hoops right now, and God bless them. It's a great sport. If you're watching, you're watching. Good. We want your viewers, right? But you just can't really get upset, on Draymond's point or anybody else's point. You can't really get upset if somebody, enjoys content one way over another person, because as long as they're enjoying the content, that's fine. Now, if you want to project your opinions on something, keep it opinion, but don't bash me for my differing opinion, or
That's
don't tell
right.
me you think Chris Paul is better than Isaiah Thomas, and that's fact. Whereas my Detroit Pistons Isaiah Thomas, in my opinion, is better than Chris Paul. So I'll debate you and I'll come up with some facts, but don't bash me about it because I think one way over the other. So in terms of the analyst, to kind of bring it back to that point, is you want that narrative driven but non-biased content, and that's everything, right? Because everything is about the sport. The sport is the narrative. Just don't project your biases onto me because I have my own anyways.
And to your point, I think that the regional broadcasters and analysts are the best at it. I'm in North Carolina, and I see a bunch of Hornets games, and I always say that their
Great
broadcast
there.
team is the best. What Dale Curry and Eric Collins does is amazing. I mean, they break down the game. They simplify it. They don't have their own biases to it, and it's fine. And I think a lot of these regional networks are like that, and as versus like the national networks like the ABCs, TNTs, they inject their biases into the narratives, and some even complain about what they're seeing. I remember, I guess it was one playoff game. I think it was last year or maybe the year before. It was Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy. I guess the Warriors went on a run. I think it was a Warriors game, and Jeff Van Gundy was complaining, just going off on a tangent about, I guess, the refs or something. But I mean, I don't want to hear all that. you know.
Ari, when you were talking about people who are, really love their job and are clearly good at it, and Jannelle, when you asked the question, I was trying to think, like, who doesn't like this? Like, who's talking about this that doesn't like it? But when you were talking, I started thinking about I've heard some like local radio sometimes, and I'm sure that they probably still love the sport, but the way that they come off talking about it, it sounds like they're just miserable because they just complain and complain and complain. And I know that's to like get the conversation started. But at the same time, I'm like, isn't there some way you can have this conversation where that doesn't start off like with, man, Carmelo Anthony really sucked tonight? Like, could we say maybe he didn't have his best night? What could he have done? Or, it's just like, sometimes I think they just like to get the conversation started in a way that's different than I would start it.
I mean, my idea of like regional broadcast, to me, from what I think they're pretty much positive. I don't really listen to too much radio, but like I think every fan you talk to loves their own guys, right? So whatever the Pistons play on and whatever the Blazers play on and the Warriors, I think you love your broadcast team. I think everyone pretty much does, from what I talk to. I think a lot of the beef and the complaints, to be complete honest with you, come from one team, and that's the Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson team, because they do have a lot of negativity in there. I think Mark Jackson, personally, I think he's kind of negative. But I find them to be funny, personally. I can't really think of any other national broadcast team that really is negative or complains about certain things. I mean, I like other analysts better than others. I'm a big fan of Doris Burke. I'm a big fan of Huey Brown. But outside of Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy, I really don't know if there's another team out there nationally that's very negative on the game. It just so happens to be it's the A team of the ABC network, so they cover all the biggest games with all like the highest ratings, and it's kind of a bad look for the league if you don't really care for them or care for their banter. So I think that ABC should look into maybe replacing one or two of them. If Mark Jackson gets a head coaching job, he's going to be replaced. But overall, I really don't think there's a negative tone. I just think people have their preferences, and I think a lot of people just prefer their home broadcast team rather than a national broadcast team that they're not familiar with.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, as far as local, like I said, I like Dale and Eric Collins, and as far as national, I mean, I could just put up with Mark and Jeff. It's all for me. It's all about the product on the court. If I had to, I'd just mute them, like I mute Reggie Miller and Chris Webber. Man,
yeah, I'm not a big fan of Webber.
Nobody is.
Webber's way too much for me. Mike Breen is actually the Knicks broadcaster, so I hear him at 82 games a year if I'm watching on MSG. But yeah, Mark Jackson's a little negative for me. But at the end of the day, I mean, as long as the game's entertaining, it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, like I said, yeah, I agree. If you had to put them on mute, put them on mute.
Yeah.
And some instances, it's enjoyable that way. I remember I had to do that, like I said, with Reggie and Weber one night. I even had to do that with Fitz, from the Warriors. I mean, now that guy, he means well, but he is a total homer, and he says some of the most cringiest things on air.
Can't be cringier than Chris Webber. I'm sorry. That's as cringy.
It's cool to be you got to be a homer if you're local.
Yeah, everyone loves their locals.
You got to be a homer if you're local. Man.
Yeah, you have to be.
I mean, it's part of the job. Literally, you're paid to do it. But you know what I mean? Even outside of that, I mean, you got to be a little bit of homer if you're local. But the national, I get it. You want a little non-biased, but the homer, you got to have your homer local broadcast.
I also think it's kind of obvious, though, like, and this is not to knock specifically Mark Jackson or whatnot, but I see a lot of people complaining that these analysts don't really say the right things about their teams. Like, they might come off with a narrative about the team that's just not even completely true. And I think that fans want a more accurate description of their team and what their team represents, and they don't really get that in a national broadcast. It's more of like cliff notes that they think really applies that really doesn't. So to me, I can see where that's frustrating.
Yeah, I see where that's frustrating as well. It's not enough of analysts as far as like breaking down, what they're seeing. And whenever Draymond retires, I think he would be good at it. I mean,
It'd
have
be
you
great.
guys seen? Have you guys seen what he's been doing on TNT? What he's doing is phenomenal, and I like what Kenny Smith does too. He tries to explain to us, what's going on. I don't see it that much anymore from anybody. I really don't.
Yeah, like I said, I think on the ABC, the A team, Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, they're just more there for humor and talking about the game and throwing out narratives. But, to be fair, I think the Hubie Browns of the world, I think the Doris Burks of the world, I think do a phenomenal job. I think they're very good at what they do and they're good at explaining the game. It's just that, they're not uplifted the way that the Mark Jacksons and the Jeff Van Gundys of the world are. You kind of have to watch TNT and watch the late game in order to hear them.
Yeah, and
So
I think they do it. Oh, I think they do it by design because they want to keep the casual fan around to keep them interested.
Right.
And hopefully, if they want to learn more, then they go to the Hubie Browns and the Doris Burks. And I think that's what the end game is. I hope that's what the end game is.
Could be.
What was you going to say, Tara?
I was just going to say that we had an interesting situation in Portland unfold over the last couple of years after Kevin Calabro became the play-by-play for Portland. I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. They just switched over the entire broadcast team, and it was like this huge thing because everybody loved the guys that were there before, and suddenly they made this giant switch and they brought in Kevin Calabro, who at the time had been working for ESPN, had been calling a lot of national games, but prior to that had been in Seattle. Portland and Seattle are not the same. Not at all. And for the first 6 months, Kevin Calabro could, once a game would drop Sonics or something like that instead of like the whatever. And it was a very rough entry into, being the voice of the Portland Trailblazers. And just prior to the bubble situation, he actually stepped down and was like, it's not going to be for me. So they had to scramble at the very last second, and they grabbed this guy named Jordan Kent, who had been like the host of the pregame show for the last many years. And he stepped into that role, and we are everybody I know is just over the moon, partly because he's a local. He was an Oregon Duck. He was actually a 3-sport athlete for the Oregon Ducks. His dad was Ernie Kent, who was the coach of the Oregon Ducks basketball team for a long time. But it was just so funny because we resisted Kevin Calabro so much because he was the national, he's been brought in, he's from Seattle, and no, we're not Seattle. And then just with this shocking turnaround, quick turnaround, Jordan Kent just is in there, and I'm just I'm writing everybody at the Blazers going, please keep Jordan Kent, please keep Jordan Kent. Because he didn't have to go through that whole period of adaptation where I don't know if I assume other teams are like that, where somebody comes in from the outside, they should be given a list of 20 things never, ever, ever, ever to say during a broadcast. Do not call the Blazers the Sonics, right? And Kevin Calabro ended up being great. We were all, enjoyed his calls and everything like that. But I just think it's funny that, how much we fall for our local broadcast teams and just get really attached to them, and we have high expectations, and then when it's only a game on TNT and we have to watch it on TNT, it's just so but to bring it all back, the reason they do that is because not everybody has a home team that they can watch every game. They have to go around the league, and that's just how it is. So we'll survive it if it's a TNT game.
Surviving if it's a TNT game. I like that. But the inside the NBA crew is great at what they do. They mix humor and narrative along with analysis, and I like watching their halftime show, their pre and post game show. It's good to have that happy medium. That's what I like about TNT. But as far as their broadcast team, I just watch the game on mute. and that's it. And wait
You're
for
lucky your
Saturday.
team's on TNT. My team's on TNT once every 3 years. Awful.
Oh,
Oh,
Biggest media market in the damn country. You can't on national TV because we're terrible. It's horrible.
next
that's a
year.
shame. And that brings me up
Next
to a
year.
point as far as back in the days.
Yeah.
I look at other sports like the NFL, and they seem to, celebrate the current crop of players, but not really, and also some of the past players, and not forgetting the history. And I think that's where the NBA drops the ball. I mean, it's possible to, celebrate these current crop of players and, not forgetting about the past. And I noticed with some of the former athletes that's on TV, they seem a little bit bitter. And they're the main ones that's talking about how the game has changed and how bad it is. Especially like when the Warriors were on their run, you know, that there was a lot of a lot of negative feedback on that. But it's possible to, celebrate the current players and not really dissing one era and for the other or vice versa. And that's one thing I wish the NBA would, learn how to strike balance of. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree with that too. But I also think that proper education, proper knowledge of the past is important, and I think that you just got to seek that out. And I think some of the 30 for 30s, I think some of the documentaries, I think some of the stuff that's coming out, all the podcasts, all the content. If you want to find it out, you can find it out without a doubt. You could, you know what I mean? Unfortunately, like Wilt's 100-point game's not even, on film, which I wish it was. I would love to watch that, but everyone knows he did it. Everyone knows stuff about Oscar Robertson. We were talking about Bob Cousy on the podcast earlier. The history of the game's there. And to be honest with you, I got a little beef with a NBA former player who's being paid to be a on TV analyst of the NBA, talking about how former NBA players aren't respected. I'm like, dude, you got a job. There's plenty of people out there who are qualified to have that job. You have that job because, one, you're qualified. Good for you. Yes, you're qualified. But also, two, because you're an ex-NBA player, and we like to support, and by we, I mean the NBA, we like to support ours, right? And so I disagree with some of that. I think a lot of the narrative is driven by former NBA players who are shaking their stick from their porch saying, the game's different now, there's hand checking back in the day, and it's so easy to score now. And like, sure, all that stuff's fine and dandy, but like, I don't know. I've always had beef with not staying in your own lane and kind of getting down on people for some sort of opinion that this and that. I mean, I agree 100% that the education of the NBA is not there, right? If you don't understand that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is one of the, like, in my opinion, top 2 greatest players of all time, if he's not in your top 5 and you have a guy like, James Harden in there over Kareem, like, we're just not going to have a conversation together. I can't talk to you about that, right?
Exactly.
But at the same time, I'm not going to be the person who has sympathy for an ex-NBA player who's literally being paid to give their opinions on the NBA because they're an ex-NBA player. I just can't get down with that.
Speaking of documentaries, have you seen the one about Isaiah Thomas? Especially you, Ari, as a Pistons fan.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about, Rashad Phillips.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yoda's documentary was phenomenal. That's the kind of content that we need as far as educating, the casual fan.
But
that
it's there.
Awesome.
It's there, yeah.
Yes, it's there. And that's a good example. He's doing one on Chauncey Billups, if I'm not mistaken.
I got to look that up.
Good stuff. That kind of documentary is what's needed, especially along with the 30 for 30s and, of course, The Last Dance. That's important.
Yeah, I think it's important, but I mean, at the same time, you have to come with grips to reality here. I mean, these things are just not being watched. I mean, they're on NBA TV. You can access everything on YouTube. I just don't think there's a general thirst for knowledge for, players like Kareem or Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain. A large part of that is because there wasn't that much video footage of them. Like, you can't really find a lot to do with them. And, we live in an age now where it's like, give me this now. When we watch this, when we watch that. And I just don't think it piques the interest of a lot of people, at the same time, these athletes are given jobs as TV analysts. They do You do see them here and there on TV. I do think the NBA does a good job of letting you know who the legends of the game are. I just think it's up to us, the fan, to go out and seek these videos or these documentaries. And I just think we as a fan can kind of be held responsible instead of the NBA. You know, I don't want to be watching a game and see a Chris Paul highlight, and then every time there's a Chris Paul highlight, it's like, you know, he's good, but you know what else is good? Isaiah Thomas, he's great. Like, because that can get really old. You know what I'm saying? But so I think the NBA is doing a decent job at it, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to consume that. And if that's not what we as a whole are interested in, I may be interested in it, you might be interested in it, but not everybody else is, and that is a shame. I think it's a lack of respect for history, and I don't really know how you change that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't see how you can change it. I think it's kind of hard because, you know, everything is a now. It's now. We want it now.
Yeah.
It's instant, and you know, there's no problem with it. And for me, the problem is, you know, you're trying to engage in conversation about basketball and not really understanding not only the nuances but the history behind it. You have to have some kind of history behind it, or else you come off looking like a fool. And there's a lot of fools on that Bird app. I say bird brains on this Bird app, and that's just what it is. And you know, and it's a cycle because there's a lot of bird brains on the air
who hide behind avatars of their favorite players. Show your face.
Oh yeah.
I think it's really interesting to consider like how different the, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like lifestyle of the current players are compared to players in the past. And one thing that's been, I think, you know, really interesting is like, as we learn more about the racist history of our country and the types of things that players had to endure and overcome in the past. And I'm not saying that current players don't, because they do too. But for me, as far as like education goes, it's a really interesting line to follow. And I've just learned a lot more about people in our country, just going back and learning the history of basketball in our country. And I suggest that, you know, people who are interested in basketball go back and read it through that lens. And I think it's also interesting to think about, like, even within like a couple of generations, how vastly different things are. Like, we've got Gary Trent Jr. on our team, and just the difference in what the league was like when Gary Trent Sr. was playing compared to Gary Trent Jr. right now. And so many guys who had like their fathers playing. I just think it's really interesting and something to think about for, you know, maybe the fans who, you know, want to know more about the history of the game, helping them understand that like it's not just like this guy nailed 10 rules up on the wall. Like, it's cool that we know when it began, but just following it all through, it's just a really fascinating story. And I think it tells us a lot about our country. And I know it's a worldwide game, but I haven't gotten to that part of it yet. I'm still trying to understand it in our own country.
That is an interesting point, and I agree. And when I think of, you know, what's going on, the climate of our country right now, and thinking about what Bill Russell had to endure back in the day, and even what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had to endure back in the day, I mean, I just find it fascinating that history repeats itself. And it's a shame that, you know, we don't hear much from Bill Russell as far as, you know, what's going on now, except for a few tweets. And you don't hear that much from Kareem. If it
Kareem
Kareem had a nice piece on it.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Kareem's out there, man. I respect Kareem.
Yeah,
Kareem's a
Kareem is
social
out
advocate.
there.
He's a warrior out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is right. I forgot that he did have some pieces out there. He's really out there. But as far as Bill, he just maybe a couple of tweets here and there. But I really would love to hear what he has to say about the climate of this country, and maybe more than just, you know, a few tweets here or there, especially what he went through in Boston.
I wonder if they're going to discuss it more as the playoffs go, because, you know, one of the things that they talked about was different ways that they can approach the social justice issues that are going on in our country right now, like during this whole NBA restart. I'm curious, like, how that's going to continue through the rounds of the playoffs.
Me too. That's what I'm really curious about. What do you guys think about what they're doing? I mean, they have the statements on their jersey, and I think the NBPA have a fund going on also, and CP3 has his own initiative with Carmelo and D Wade. What are y'all guys thoughts on that?
I think it's fantastic. I think it's really important to give players a message to get their point across, especially on a topic like social justice, which it's sad to say, and it sounds crazy to say that equality for all humans isn't a common mentality in 2020, and it's absurd and it's disgusting, and it's fantastic that the NBA, one, on the center court across the entire line, have Black Lives Matter. And not to get too political, but the president of our country won't even utter the words, right? So the NBA is doing a wonderful job at getting stuff out there. Now, I have heard some complaints on the players that the messages were a little bit watered down, that they had to agree upon with the NBPA for the back of the jersey messaging. And so some players, and I think LeBron was one of those, and a few other guys just decided to put their name on it. And because of that, I think they caught a little bit of flack. But if the approved messages aren't the message you want to stand behind, or there's other messages you want to get across, I think they're doing that. And I think there's a lot of, speaking of, today would be a great day to arrest the killers of Breonna Taylor, right? And you're hearing a lot of that in the post game interviews. Tobias Harris, for instance, respect, one of my favorite ex-Pistons of the recent past, has put a lot of light on that. And they're giving a opportunity for NBA players, which is a mostly black league, to provide an opinion on equality. And I couldn't be more proud of Adam Silver. I couldn't be more proud of the players for sticking up for themselves and for what they believe in, and it's wonderful to see.
Yeah, I think the NBA's done a fantastic job. I mean, there was one complaint, like Ari said, about maybe the back of the jerseys being watered down, but they're giving their players platforms. They're running charities. They have Black Lives Matter on the court. Like, they're doing everything possible to give their athletes a voice, and the athletes are taking advantage of it. I really don't know if you can ask more from from a league than what the NBA is doing. So I think it's an A+. I think they're hitting it out of the park, to be honest with you.
Shout out to the broadcast partners for allowing it, because there's certain stations that may not have allowed that, and so shout out for that happening, because there's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot of people that are, I'm not going to watch the NBA because they're kneeling for the anthem, which is just ludicrous. But that's out there, right? And broadcast is in it for money, and they're allowing it to happen, and they're pushing that narrative, and even saying that you have to allow that is absurd. But they are, and it's great, and it's wonderful to see. I really like it.
I thought that after a while, I would sort of just get accustomed to seeing the sayings on the jersey, and they would kind of I wouldn't notice them anymore. But I find myself still education reform, they're popping up constantly, and they've not faded into the background. I'm I think it's ingraining in my brain, and maybe it's ingraining into the brains of people who maybe hadn't thought those messages before. But I like that it's keeping things up at the forefront.
I do too. You couldn't ask any more from a league than what the NBA is doing. And they are really attentive and, really made it a point to put social justice at the forefront. And it's important because of the demographics of the league. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more. And especially during the era of player empowerment, and that has a lot to do with it too. It's all intertwined. A lot of people say, I don't want politics in sports, but when you look at the history of sports, it is political. Even in, for example, Muhammad Ali, go choosing not to go to Vietnam in this prime. I mean, throughout the history of sports, it's always been a political slant. And again, history repeats itself. And what the NBA is doing, I mean, you can't ask for anything more. So they are really doing a good job with that. So to wrap everything up, what are your final thoughts? Starting with you, Josh.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, the NBA ratings are down. I don't think you can. We talked about narratives, but I'm not sure you can really make a causation, like causation thing with, narratives affecting the ratings. I think it more has to do with the fact that we all have access to a cell phone, to any type of media we want at any given time. We can watch social clips that are about a minute or two that can recap everything. We just live in a different world than we did 10 years ago, even a decade ago. The game is as good as ever. We consume it differently. What we talk about is differently. We just really need to adapt. Baseball is kind of declining. If you look at other sports in the country right now, they're on the way down too. Like baseball's on the way down. I have a feeling that football ratings are going to be down as well. So the NBA is not unique in this situation. And I think there's a really big opportunity for the NBA to capitalize on a lot of different things going forward. The league is really popular still. We just consume it differently. And, I think it's going to be around for a while. I think it could, I wouldn't say it is going to take football as the main sport in the country, but, in a decade or two, it wouldn't surprise me.
All right, Ari, I realize that you need to go. What are your final thoughts?
So I guess my final thoughts on this would be I'll give a promotion to league and say if you ever wanted to give the NBA a try, this bubble sort of format of purity in basketball and hyper focused on the sport with no fan, nothing around, nobody heckling the player, nothing like that. This playoffs with true zero home court advantage. Everybody's going back, sleeping in the same type of hotel room bed. Everybody's eating the same type of food. It's all coming down to the X and O's. It's going to come down to the talent. It's going to come down to a little bit of health too. We saw Westbrook already go down for the Rockets, and to be honest with you, I think Thunder are going to beat the Rockets because of that. But that's my humble opinion there. But for that reason alone, this NBA playoffs leading into the NBA Finals, really hope coronavirus has not been anywhere near that bubble yet, and I hope that stays. But if you really want to check out an NBA playoffs and you really want to maybe see some of those narratives through the lens of the actual basketball game, I mean, put on NBA basketball starting tomorrow. You're going to absolutely love the product. It's going to be fantastic. You're going to see some really close fought games. You're going to see some unbelievable talent on display. I would say I would leave my final thoughts there. I'd say, for everybody who's trying to drive a different bias or a different narrative or something of that nature based upon social media, based upon, the talking heads, whoever it is, literally now with the bubble basketball is the time to watch the sport and to really enjoy basketball. So don't let the narratives get in your way. Watch the sport, enjoy it, have a good time, stay inside, stay healthy, stay safe, and watch basketball. Come on now.
All right, what about you, Tara?
Well, this fits really well into my agenda to make the world a better place through basketball. Having more, we're able to have conversations again about it. I'm able to talk to, people can go and watch now. I'm so glad that I am all in on the NBA. I was really waffling about whether or not I was going to watch this because I thought I didn't know that if it was going to be safe, and it just felt weird to me that they were sending all these players off to basically be locked down. And I didn't feel I didn't know how much the players were invested in that, if they were doing it simply because they felt they had to make their money, or if they were what they were going to do with it. And the players just consistently keep raising the bar in terms of showing their creativity and the things that they can do, all of this while also playing fantastic, entertaining basketball. I'm just so glad it's back.
As for me, when I heard that the NBA was returning into the bubble, I was skeptical. And my skepticism was elevated to cautious optimism. And I see what they're doing as far as testing and everything in the bubble. And, they're doing a phenomenal job. A lot of, they've been negative so far. And the play on the court has been phenomenal. It's been awesome. I'm excited for the playoffs to begin. And the only thing I have to say for folks is just to sit down and just enjoy the game for what it is. Stop trying to compare and to quantify everything. And you'll find some appreciation for it. Maybe your knowledge might grow. And this is a great time to really learn about the game and to appreciate it. And I'm excited to do that as well. And This is it for another edition of I Got More. I want to thank you, Tara, Josh, and Ari for joining me, and I will see y'all next week.